Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take a whole load of information, dig through it, and pull out the really key insights and, yeah, maybe some surprising facts just for you.
It's like getting the Cliff's Notes, but, way more interesting.
Exactly. It's your fast track to getting informed. And today, we're diving deep into writing, the craft, the business side, all of it.
Yeah, we're working from a set of newsletters for professional writers, actually. They're from the Write Well series by Angela Hunt, the best-selling author. She's published, over 155 books?
Wow, okay, so she definitely knows her stuff. And these newsletters sound packed with practical advice.
They really are. Whether you're just thinking about writing, starting out, or you're already doing it professionally, there's definitely something here for you.
Okay, guiding us through all this, helping us make sense of it, is our expert. So it seems like these newsletters cover a lot of ground.
They do. And what's really striking is how it all connects. Being a successful writer isn't just about the big idea. It's also the nuts and bolts of the language, understanding who you're writing for, how publishing actually works. It's a whole package.
Makes sense. Let's start with the language stuff. I saw these newsletters have a word of the week section. That caught my eye, like mendacious.
Mendacious. Yeah, it's a good one. Not a word you necessarily use every day, but powerful. The definition given is untruthful, lying, addicted to falsehood.
Addicted to falsehood? Wow.
Right. And the noun is mendacity. Think about it, saying a character is mendacious is much stronger than just saying they lied once. It suggests it's part of their character.
Like that example they gave. The pretend countess was a mendacious braggart. Her mendacity amazed even her interviewers. You get a real picture.
Exactly. It implies a pattern, a deep-seated untrustworthiness. Comes from the Latin mendax, just meaning lying. So pretty direct.
So as a writer, using a word like that adds depth.
Precisely. It paints a richer picture. Instead of just saying he lied, saying he was mendacious, tells the reader this dishonesty is fundamental to who he is. It can really drive the story.
Okay, I see that. Adds weight. Another word was vestige. How do you say that again?
Vestige. Yeah, the newsletter points out the pronunciation is a shadow or a remnant of something now vanished or lost. The origin is Latin vestigium, which means footprint.
Oh, I like that. A footprint left behind.
Yeah, like the example, since retiring from tennis, she does not have even a vestige of interest in sports. It's that lingering trace.
And the related word vestigial, like a vestigial pulse of anger.
Right, something that's diminished, maybe lost its original function, but it's still there in some small way. That idea is super useful for writers, showing how the past still echoes in a character's present.
That makes sense, even if they're not aware of it.
Exactly. The newsletter mentions that anecdote about a vestigial tale, too, makes the concept stick, a physical leftover.
It does. Okay, next up. Querulous. This sounds a bit like query, which writers obviously use all the time.
It does sound similar, and that's a really important distinction the newsletter makes. Querulous means complaining, fault-finding, irritable, and petulant. Comes from Latin query, to complain.
Okay, so definitely negative.
Very negative. The example. The teacher dreaded his monthly meeting with the principal, who asked questions in a querulous tone. You could just hear that whining, can't you?
Yeah, totally.
And that's not how you want your query letter to sound when you're approaching a publisher. Query just means to question. No negativity there.
Right. You want to sound professional and interested, not like you're complaining already. A querulous query is probably going straight to the bin.
You got it. Then there's dilettante. This one's interesting because its meaning has sort of shifted.
Yeah, originally it was positive, right? Someone who just enjoyed the arts.
Exactly. From the Latin delectare to delight, which is lovely. Think delectable, delectation, same root. But now
it implies someone's just dabbling, maybe a bit pretentiously.
That's often the sense, yeah. Like the example. Mr. Jones is quite the dilettante. He knows a lot about art until you ask about a specific artist. It suggests a lack of real depth.
Makes you think about needing genuine knowledge in your own writing, not just surface stuff. Okay, last one. Apparatchik. Sounds political.
It has strong political roots. Historically, a member of the Communist Party apparatus from the Russian apparat.
Right.
But now it's used more broadly, usually negatively, for someone in any large organization, political or otherwise, who just seems to follow the party line, like a cog in the machine.
Like the example, an apparatchik of the labor unions, just following orders.
Sort of implies a lack of independent thought, yeah. So a really useful set of words there, lots of nuance for writers.
Definitely. Okay, so moving beyond just words, these newsletters tackle the practical side of being a writer. There was a Q&A section, and one big question was just, How do you get writing opportunities?
Ah, the million-dollar question. The advice in the newsletter from Angela Hunt is pretty blunt. Stop shooting in the dark.
Hmm.
You need to treat writing professionally,
Meaning?
meaning study the craft. It actually recommends specific resources, like craft books mentioning Angela Hunt's own book, Writing Lessons from the Front, which you can find on Amazon. And it emphasizes using tools like Writer's Market.
Ah, Writer's Market, the big directory.
Exactly. You need to identify specific places that publish the kind of thing you write, magazines, websites, whatever. Learn what they actually buy.
So research first. Don't just send stuff out randomly.
Right. Generate ideas that fit their needs, then write target inquiry letters. The newsletter stresses that you build credibility by actually selling your work consistently. That's key, especially if you want to do something like ghostwriting later on. You need proof you can deliver.
That makes total sense. Build a track record. Another question was about publishing personal stories. Lots of people want to do that, right?
For sure. And the newsletter says, yeah, people do it, both self-publishing and through traditional routes. But there's a but. For traditional publishers, it often helps a lot if you're already known like a celebrity, or if your personal story offers something really valuable, like unique information or deep inspiration, to a wide audience.
So it's not just about your story being important to you, but its potential appeal to others.
If you're aiming for a traditional deal, yes. But the newsletter also wisely points out that writing those stories just for friends and family is incredibly meaningful in itself, and there are ways to do that well.
Good point. Not everything has to be a bestseller to be worthwhile. Okay, financials. Someone asked about traditional versus self-publishing, money-wise.
Yeah, and it's complicated, as the newsletter says, not a straight comparison. Self-publishing might give you a higher percentage per book.
But you pay for everything yourself, right? Editing, cover, marketing.
Exactly, and you might sell fewer copies overall. Traditional publishers take a bigger slice of the pie, percentage-wise, but they handle all that production, distribution, marketing stuff.
Which could lead to way more sales, potentially earning you more money, even with a lower royalty rate.
Potentially, yeah. Though the newsletter does note that getting those traditional deals is getting tougher. More competition.
Makes sense. Need a really polished manuscript then. Okay, last Q&A point. Websites. Do writers need a personal website to sell books?
The newsletter gives a balanced view. If you're selling books directly yourself, then yes, obviously. But most authors link to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, etc.
So maybe not crucial for direct sales for everyone.
Right, but the real value, according to the newsletter, is connection. It's a place readers can find you.
Ah, okay. So readers who like your book can learn more about you, find your other books, maybe sign up for your newsletter.
Exactly. It builds that author-reader relationship. It's less about the single transaction, more about building a following. And apparently, a future newsletter will cover what actually makes a good author website.
Ooh, useful. Shows how writers always need to be learning, adapting. Okay, let's shift from the Q&A to some core principles these newsletters highlight. Editing comes up a lot.
Huge emphasis on editing. Starts with that great Mark Twain quote, if you catch an adjective, kill it.
Huh. Brutal but memorable.
And it connects to this section called Count Your Quarters.
Yeah, I loved this idea.
It's a technique from an English teacher, Janet Williams. Basically, as you edit your own stuff, you pretend to pay yourself 25 cents for every single unnecessary word you cut.
That's brilliant. It makes cutting feel rewarding, not painful. What kind of words are we talking about?
Well, lots of adverbs, those undally words that often just prop up weak verbs. Filler words like rather, just, very, really. And too many uses of was and were. That often signals passive voice, which can make writing feel flat.
Like the example they use. Instead of the dog was on the floor.
It becomes the terrier at his feet yawned. Much more active visual can say you see the dog doing something.
Yeah, much better. And the advice goes beyond single words, right? Cutting backstory.
Definitely. Cut chunks of backstory from the beginning. You need to hook the reader fast. Trim explanations the reader can figure out themselves. Go easy on exclamation points.
Guilty as charged sometimes.
We all are. And cut down those long descriptive paragraphs if they're not pulling their weight in the scene.
And those redundant phrases, stood to her feet, becomes just stood. Clapped his hands is just clap.
Exactly. The newsletter mentions Angela Hunt cut 6,000 words from one of her own reissued novels, The Truth Teller, just by tightening like this as her skills improves over time.
6,000 words. That's amazing. It shows how much flab can creep in.
It really does. The analogy used is like a car mechanic adding parts you don't need just makes things clunky.
Okay, so ruthless editing is key.
Yeah.
What about republishing older work? The newsletter talks about that too, assuming you get your rights back.
Yeah, this is a big topic now with digital publishing. For magazine articles, if you didn't sell all rights, you can often resell them elsewhere.
Good to know. What about books?
For nonfiction, you might update it, add a new chapter on recent developments, like the example of an adoption book adding info on snowflake babies, give it a new cover, and republish.
Keep it relevant and fiction.
Similar idea, new cover, but the editing focus is often on tightening, cutting those weasel words we just talked about, like that other example of cutting 7,000 words by removing things like stood to her feet.
Wow. But getting rights back isn't always easy, is it?
No. The newsletter points out that with ebooks and print on demand, publishers can technically keep a book available forever,
Yeah.
even if they're not really promoting it or selling many copies.
Which means they don't have to give the rights back.
Often, yeah. It can be really frustrating for authors who see their older books just sitting there, kind of languishing, when they feel they could give them new life.
I can imagine. Can you sell reverted rights to another traditional publisher?
The newsletter says it can happen, mentions an instance, but it's pretty rare. Publishers usually want new stuff, not something another house dropped or that didn't sell well before.
Makes sense from their end, I guess. Oh, and the point about not updating technology in older novels.
Right. Like deciding not to give characters in a 1999 novel smartphones because it would completely kill the plot. The Cujo example is perfect if the mom had a cell signal, there's no movie.
Huh. True. Sometimes the old tech is the plot device. So the bottom line on rights reversion clauses and contracts.
Look for them. Ask for them. Try to negotiate them. But be prepared for the publisher to say no. The author of the newsletter clearly enjoys having control over her backlist and keeping those books alive herself.
Understandable. Okay, let's talk fiction versus nonfiction. The newsletter draws a clear line.
Yeah, the core difference. Nonfiction is primarily about conveying information. Fiction is primarily about affecting emotions.
But the best nonfiction uses fiction techniques.
Absolutely. To make the information engaging, memorable, relatable. The newsletter author, Angela Hunt, talks about her own experience starting in nonfiction articles, interviews, and how those skills helped her fiction, and vice versa.
Like that example of writing about homelessness.
Perfect illustration. You have the dry statistical opening, then a sort of general emotional appeal.
And then the third one, the story about Greg Lawson, the specific person.
Exactly. That's the one that grabs you emotionally, right? Uses narrative techniques to make you feel something, even while conveying information about the issue.
Definitely. So the argument is that good writers should ideally be comfortable with both.
Pretty much. Fiction writers need to write nonfiction, think back, cover copy, marketing materials, maybe giving talks. And nonfiction writers benefit hugely from using fictional tools, vivid scenes, character sketches, and interviews to make their work compelling, while still being truthful, of course.
Right. Truth is paramount in nonfiction. It all comes back to engaging the reader. There's that Chaucer quote.
The life's so short, the craft so long to learn.
Yeah. A bit daunting.
It is. But it highlights that writing is a craft you keep learning. The newsletter mentions Solstein's analogy, learning to write is like learning to ride a bike.
You can read about it, but you have to actually do it.
Exactly. You need purposeful practice. You need to evaluate what you're doing, develop that editorial eye for your own work, and you have to keep going, even when you fall off the bike, so to speak.
Persistence. Okay, now huge topic.
Yeah.
The beginning. The newsletter really stresses this.
Critically important. It cites Solstein. His research back in the day showed bookstore browsers often decided by page 3.
And the newsletter says now it's maybe even just the first line.
Yeah, attention spans are shorter, there's more competition. That opening has to work hard. Stein's advice for the first paragraph still holds. Spark curiosity about a character or relationship, set the scene, hint at the theme.
And the advice for the very first sentence.
Introduce a being, usually a person, in a provocative situation or question. Something that makes the reader immediately ask, what's going on here? Or what happens next?
Like that Jodi Picoult opening. Ross Wakeman succeeded the first time he tried to kill himself, but not the second or the third. Whoa.
Right. Instant questions. Why? What happened? Will he try again? The newsletter lists others, too, like Scarlett O'Hara was not beautiful. It makes you analyze why they work.
It's a great exercise for writers, isn't it? Look at the first line of your own project. Does it hook? Does it ask a question?
Definitely. And a warning in there, too. Avoid starting with just a generic line of dialogue from a character.
Unless it's really startling, like some of those examples.
Exactly. An interesting point from Susan Bell. Sometimes the real beginning, the best first sentence, is actually hiding later in your draft. You might find it during editing.
So be willing to cut that initial scene or paragraph if it's just throat clearing.
Yeah, try removing it. See if the story starts stronger without it. The first chapter, the newsletter says, is like a contract with the reader.
A contract? How so?
It tells the reader what kind of story this is, genre, whose eyes they'll be seeing it through, point of view, the author's style, voice, when and where it's happening, and who the main character is likely to be. You need to establish that clearly to pull the reader into the, what did John Gardner call it?
The fictive dream.
That's it. You want them lost in the story world.
Okay, and part of that dream is believable characters. Heroes, villains, anti-heroes.
Right. The key point here is realism comes from mixing virtues and flaws. Nobody is all good or all bad. Purely evil villains or saints for heroes can feel kind of flat, cardboard.
Like that funny anecdote about older Christian fiction where you could spot the bad girls because they wore red nail polish.
Exactly. The simplistic shorthand. The newsletter talks about the rise of the anti-hero characters we root for, despite their flaws. Maybe because they seem more real or they're fighting something worse. Like in The Day of the Jackal, The Godfather, Dexter.
Yellowstone comes to mind, too.
Good example. Maybe it reflects a tendency to root for the lesser of two evils sometimes. But even then, readers still crave some goodness. They admire characters who struggle, who have weaknesses, but also find courage.
So how do you create that complexity?
One great piece of advice in the newsletter: give your characters something they love passionately, for both heroes and villains.
Something they love.
Yeah. For an anti-hero, that thing they love should be threatened that raises the stakes. For a more traditional hero, show their love for family, God, country, whatever it is, and then have the antagonist threaten that. It makes their motivations relatable.
That makes sense. It humanizes them, even the villain to some extent.
It does. Though the newsletter notes, secondary characters don't need that same deep dive. And it clarifies the difference between a villain, always an antagonist, and an antagonist, anyone blocking the hero. Not every obstacle needs a complex psychology.
Got it. Okay, shifting towards the end here, the newsletters talk a lot about perseverance. Sticking with it.
Vitally important in writing. There's a great analysis of a Joan Didion quote. She talked about lacking confidence, but having this blind faith that just doing the work every day would make it better.
And that feeling of low dread before starting.
Yeah, but it dissipates after an hour or so of work. Many writers can relate to that. And her thing about using the good silverware every day because every day is all there is, that's about valuing the process, the daily effort.
Love that. And the Harrison Ford story.
Him working as a carpenter while waiting for acting gigs. It just highlights the crazy attrition rate in fields like acting or writing. So many people start, but fewer stick it out long enough.
So perseverance is almost a requirement.
It really is. Which ties back to that earlier advice. Maybe pay some dues first. Write smaller things articles, blog posts, hone your craft, build resilience before you tackle the giant novel.
Makes sense. Learn the ropes in smaller projects. Okay, one last area. Writing contests. Are they worth it?
The newsletter author, Angela Hunt, shares a really positive personal story. She won a children's picture book contest early on, sponsored by Abingdon Press, and it was a big boost. Learned about the genre, researched the publisher's style, found an illustrator.
So contests can be valuable.
They can be, especially for getting feedback if they're judged by industry professionals. The newsletter distinguishes between those and just like popularity contests online.
Right. Any specific reputable ones mentioned?
Yeah, American Christian fiction writers have the Carroll Awards and the Genesis Contest. Writers Digest has their annual competition. Romance Writers of America runs contests. The advice is basically to Google writing contests and do your homework.
And warnings?
Definitely. Beware of contests that are just fronts to sell you expensive publishing packages. That's usually a scam.
Okay. Entry fees are normal, though.
Yes, reasonable entry fees are standard to cover costs. But winning shouldn't mean you have to pay more money for anything. And don't break the bank entering dozens of contests either.
So how do you evaluate if a contest is legit?
Look at its reputation. Who won in the past? Is it affiliated with a known writing organization? Do they offer feedback? Who are the judges? Are the judging criteria clear? Those kinds of things.
Good checklist. So the takeaway is contests can be worthwhile, especially for feedback. But choose wisely, polish your entry, and manage your expectations about subjective judging.
Exactly. Check them out. Maybe enter something you're proud of. Can be a good learning experience.
Absolutely. Wow. Okay, we've covered a ton, all drawn from Angela Hunt's Write Well newsletters. It really sounds like an amazing resource for writers.
It really is. So much practical, actionable advice grounded in deep experience. Remember, she has that free monthly newsletter for anyone interested in writing professionally, and then a weekly subscription option for even more in-depth stuff. Definitely worth checking out if any of this resonated with you.
For sure. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, here's something for you, our listener, to think about. Looking back at the editing advice, what's one weasel word or unnecessary phrase you might be overusing in your own writing or even just your emails or daily communication?
Or maybe think about that fictive dream. What kind of story, what kind of world are you trying to create for your reader in your current project? Or even what stories are you immersing yourself in daily? These newsletters offer so many tools for both creating and appreciating the craft.
Great points. There's always more to learn and explore when it comes to writing and storytelling. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.